Welcome to this webinar by the No Kid Hungry Missouri Project. My name is Jeremy Malarski. I am one of the program managers for this project. I see a couple of familiar names and faces here in this Zoom interface. We'll go ahead and admit people as they come in. For security purposes, without getting into too great a detail, we need to keep the meeting somewhat secure as much as we can. So I sent the video link earlier today by email, and I have it set so that people need to be admitted to the room. So I'm going to simultaneously have to pause and just kind of check to see whether people are waiting. If everything's working okay, you should see the first slide of a very small PowerPoint presentation that we're going to do. Just to, if you're a visual learner like me, we're just going to kind of put our thoughts up on the slides a little bit. So without further ado, it looks like nobody's waiting to be admitted. A couple housekeeping items. We do have an hour time slotted for this webinar. And so we'll go until 2. If we end early, I expect that we will have time for questions. Sometimes we have these presentations and we haven't had this one particular before, but sometimes in these presentations things end early, and that's fine. If that happens, great. Then, this is being recorded, and we'll give you the gift of the rest of your day if that happens. Okay, so a little bit after 1, no one waiting to be admitted. Last housekeeping item, if you haven't used Zoom before, you'll notice some controls at the bottom of your screen. One of them is important, that's your mute button, and that allows you to be muted or not muted. I think I have it set so that everyone is muted by default, but it doesn't, no, looks like there's a few of you who aren't. So you should be able to unmute yourself. If you can't unmute yourself, or you need to say anything, or it's just easier to do it this way, there is also a chat button at the bottom of your screen that you can click, and you should be able to write things in that chat box at any time. And that's kind of how we'll keep things somewhat interactive. I don't have a long presentation either. So what I might do is when I stop, I'll just sort of watch that chat window. And if you have your video open and you can't get unmuted, you want to talk, just kind of raise your hand or let me know that you want to be unmuted through the chat window. And that'll kind of be one way we can do that. All right, so without further ado, again, this is our presentation on our fall grants. So I'll display the dates later in one of our slides, but we do have 2 lines of grants this year. No Kid Hungry has been operating for a little over 4 years now. This is our 4th round of these grants. One is for school breakfast and one is for after school meals. And those are due on August 2nd. The applications are due on August 2nd. If you've, and this webinar is going to be basically about questions and answers related to the grant applications themselves. And we're also, for the first time, going to have a presentation about why, what we kind of prioritize in this project and how that sort of plays out in our grant evaluation. So a little bit about us. Okay, No Kid Hungry Missouri is a joint project that in the state of Missouri is operated by several different organizations, but it began more than 10 years ago in Washington, D.C. It was founded by a nonprofit called Share Our Strength that is still in existence today. Our project is independent of Share Our Strength in many ways, but we do share branding. And of course, the whole blueprint for our project comes from Share Our Strength. We also get support from them. And also for the first time this year, they are going to be investing in Missouri directly, which we're very excited about for some small pilot projects. But generally, our program is independent. We are first entity is the one that employs me. The University of Missouri Center for Health Policy is a research and service center that is based here in the University of Missouri campus. And the center studies health policy and provides helpful research to policymakers. In addition to studying what's called social determinants of health. Child hunger is one of those. If kids are hungry, then a lot of other bad things happen, and that's been backed by the research. It goes all the way from attendance to graduation rates to behavior problems. Nothing good happens when children are hungry. particularly when it comes to public health, and that is why the center is interested in this project. For the purposes of No Kid Hungry Missouri, the center, sometimes called CHP, provides staffing and some administrative support. Our second partner is the Missouri Family and Community Trust. They were founded about 20 years ago. They are a network of nonprofit organizations that are dedicated toward public-private partnerships. The services that the MOFACT partnerships offer run the gamut from Meals on Wheels for seniors, and we even have one that participates in the summer food service program in the middle of the state to feed hungry children. The MOFACT ultimately is the grant evaluator for this project, and the funds pass through them. We at CHP, the CHP program managers, myself and Kimberly Springer, we provide recommendations to FACT to ultimately approve these grants for funding. And then, And then finally, there is the State of Missouri Department of Social Services. So the funds from this, for these grants have come from community service block grant money. It's federal money that passes through the state and is administered by our two organizations. So we are keen on being good partners to the state and to having an approach that benefits the entire state of Missouri, which, it's a good segue, has a problem with child hunger and child food insecurity that many folks are not aware of. It is often a surprise when I show this slide. There's just not a lot of awareness that kids are hungry. One of the reasons why there's not a lot of awareness is because of the stigma against child hunger. And fortunately, some of these USDA programs that we work with, that we use grant funds to help people who are using, there's at least a couple policy points in those USDA programs that address that stigma. So, for example, for the after school meals program that we work with, whether a school can serve those after school meals free to kids is a function of where that school is and not who that child is. It's the actual policy term for it is area eligibility. So for the after school meals program we're going to talk about in a bit, that runs on an area eligibility program, not an individual eligibility program, which means that kids are not asked to fill out things like, they're not asked what their family income is, for example. And so that does a little bit to remove some of the stigma. But I show this slide to show that this is a bit of a hidden problem in Missouri. Not a lot of people are aware of this. It's not one that manifests itself easily. Children very rarely raise their hands, particularly in a peer environment, and tell you that they're hungry. Usually again, you have to kind of, either comes out or you serve lots of meals, and that's how you address child hunger. Okay. And I show this slide just to show that this is not a country or city mouse problem. This is a mouse problem. Often when we discuss, leadership and direction with the state of Missouri, there's questions about whether this is good for rural or good for urban communities. Child hunger is unfortunately something that is shared by all walks of life and all regions of our state. So about the grants, we're going to, again, before we get into the specific grants, I just want to show that, our project concentrates on kind of 3 areas of nutrition: school breakfast, after school meals, and summer meals. For today, we're going to be talking about the two grant lines that are open for the first 2 of these. So we have a grant open for school breakfast, and we have a grant open for after school meals. The Share Our Strength model, in part, reasons that, put simply, we should not reinvent the wheel, and we should work with tools that we have, and we want to do something that is sustainable, that's lasting, right? And the nonprofit, again, this nonprofit model basically makes the argument that if we were to fully take advantage of child nutrition programs, then we would radically move the needle in the right direction on child hunger. That if these programs were fully utilized, if every community where these programs were a good fit were used, then far, far, far fewer children would be hungry. And some even would say that child hunger would be all but eliminated. I do think it has moved the needle on child hunger in Missouri, because as participation has increased, more meals have been served. I mean, the other part of this approach is we present tools for your toolbox. Our project is about making folks aware of these programs, making folks aware of the option to use these programs and how to use them, and also to provide funding and support for them. It's not necessary. It's not to tell you exactly how to do things in your school or your nonprofit organization. We avoid that whenever possible. We try to give folks as much room to kind of breathe and implement their projects as would benefit them and benefit their community. Excuse me. All right, so this is a little bit of our project history in terms of how much we've awarded. We have awarded almost $1.2 million based on some of these programs. We have years where we award a lot and years where we award a little, and how we prioritize what we award. I'm going to go into during the meat of this presentation, but we have put a good deal of funding into the state. And this has resulted in more free meals being served to children, particularly in areas where there's low income, lack of resources, lack of access to food. All right, so first, the school breakfast grants. Those are for schools only. And we do require there is one kind of metric we require. We ask that the school have, as of the latest count, 50% or higher students eligible for free or reduced school meals. And as with all of our grants, we require that you participate in some USDA child nutrition program. Due to COVID and the waivers that the federal government and state passed and state government implemented, there are some options here. Some schools, for example, last year, instead of serving breakfast under the school breakfast program, they served under either the seamless summer option under a national school lunch program, or they served under the summer food service program. That is okay with this grant. So if you are planning, if you're a school and you have more than 50% free reduced, and you are going to be using SFSP to serve breakfast this year, we're fine with that. But it just has to be a breakfast meal, has to be that morning meal. And those of you who are familiar with those programs know that they allow you to kind of count what time of day and what type of meal it is. So we did have people who were nervous. We had grantees, in fact, who were nervous last fall because they thought that we were going to ding them because they weren't using school breakfast program. Our priority is more meals fed to kids in vulnerable areas, period. As long as there's some kind of way for us to measure that, in this case with SSO and SFSP, there was, we are okay with that. We do ask that you kind of let us know if you're an awardee of a school breakfast grant and you're not going to use a school breakfast program. Just kind of let us know, and you'll have an opportunity to do that in the reporting requirements of the grant, which is another thing I'll cover a little bit later. Okay, so that's the main eligibility. How do we prioritize who is awarded? Because very often we do get more applications than we have funding for. There was one cycle where we didn't, but that's only happened once. Often, unfortunately, we want to give out more money than we have, so we have to prioritize the grants. And by the way, these items on this slide are not listed in any particular order. I just typed them out. I'm not ranking things. All of these are important. We look at basically the community. Is this a community that has been particularly challenged by things like COVID, by poverty, again, is there a lack of options for places that kids can get nutritious food? We look at that need. We also look at sustainability, and this one's the trickiest one because there's different ways of looking at sustainability, but the view from 50,000 feet is we want to start something that ends up having a lasting effect in Missouri. And so we look at kind of what you're doing and whether it's likely to be kind of a temporary effect or a permanent effect. And we particularly look at that when it comes to what the grantee or the applicant is proposing to purchase. So one hard and fast rule, because again, we evaluate every application is different. We evaluate everyone fairly, and we look at each applicant one by one. But one hard and fast rule we have is we cannot fund any request to purchase actual food, because that by necessity does not last. So we look for things like, is it equipment? Is it equipment that's likely to last a while? Is it training? Is it advertising that's likely to have a lasting effect? We look for that lasting effect. And none of these things, by the way, are the only thing we look at. Someone might be weak in one of these and strong and very, very strong in all the others, and they may win. It really depends on the landscape and the applications we get. We look at the entire community, and we look at the landscape in terms of who's participating already in child nutrition programs. And if it's an area that's kind of saturated, which I find myself smiling a little bit when I say that, because there's very few places in Missouri that are saturated. Missouri is a place that could use all hands on deck when it comes to fighting child hunger. But every once in a while, there will be, an application where it's like, okay, there's already folks doing this. Do you know? And usually in that case, the applicant is coming to this space for the first time, and they may not be aware of all the services that are going on at the time. But we do look at that. We don't want to duplicate efforts. We like to see cooperation and collaboration in our proposals, and that's even internal, by the way. If you can show, for example, that if you're a school, let's say you're a school and you're considering after school meals, if you say in your narrative on your application that we've already spoken with our transportation company and we've already had team meetings about this, that's going to give you points, because you often what makes a difference between a successful effort versus a non-successful effort. And I'm seeing people, by the way, who know this very well in this webinar, have worked with us on this project. If people are on board from the get-go, you're much more likely to have a program that's both popular with the kids, popular with the parents, has high participation. And that's what we want to see. We want, these grants are there to help you be successful in serving your students and ultimately Missouri's children. So we look for that coordination. We also look at, in the case of this grant, we also look at your actual, we want to know a little bit about your actual service plan. So just again, this is the only thing we look at, but if you're serving breakfast in a non-traditional way, such as breakfast in the classroom, or maybe you have a grab and go kiosk in addition to service in the cafeteria. And again, I think I get into that in a little bit. Then that's going to be a stronger application than one that, by contrast, just says we're serving traditional breakfast in the cafeteria. Now, this is a bit of what I'm about to say is a bit of a change from previous cycles. In previous cycles, we were much more strict about this. We actually said you must serve a non-traditional breakfast service model. We're not doing that this year. We want to look at the entire application. We want to look at the community. We want to look at your need, as well as your service plan. But we will prioritize non-traditional or creative approaches, just like you would in most grant-funded projects. We want to invest in good ideas. And again, going back to one of my earlier points, it would be the height of arrogance for a grant-making organization such as ours to say, this is the way you must do this. We believe very strongly that you know your school or your nonprofit organization better than we do. And this is, to kind of just incentivize that thinking about your population that you are most qualified to do, if that makes sense. Okay. These are for the record, these are Share Our Strengths service models that you can find on the NoKidHungry.org website, specifically the Center for Best Practices at NoKidHungry.org. They talk at length about these models that have shown success in schools around the country. One is breakfast in the classroom. That is just what it sounds. Instead of either in addition to or in lieu of serving breakfast in the cafeteria, breakfasts are wheeled out to classrooms, and usually there's some kind of quiet period while kids eat breakfast there. Obviously, this increases participation. Sometimes there's some waste management challenges, but those have, again, in many places, those have been overcome. I have had the pleasure of observing the breakfast in the classroom model in a couple places. The one that comes to mind is Springfield, and it does the job. The kids are awake and engaged, and it's a very communal activity. Grab and go breakfast is just simply having another point of service outside of the cafeteria, usually some kind of grab and go kiosk. My own daughter's elementary school had a grab and go kiosk for breakfast there. This one that you're seeing on the slide here is positioned near a school entrance, so kids are actually incentivized to get breakfast as they walk into the building. And then Second Chance Breakfast is having a second period, usually between the first or second class period, where maybe it's 20, 30 minutes. The cafeteria opens up again to serve breakfast. And again, there are other approaches that you can use, but these have been used in schools across the country with some measurable effect in increasing participation. I mean, the logic is fairly simple. If you increase access, you will usually increase participation. There's variance in terms of the how they get the word out. Do you use flyers? Do you use the PSA in the morning? Do you use social media? And there's been kind of a mix of how that's done. But usually if there's, cooperation, teachers on board, custodial staff, transportation staff on board, this is, like many other programs, it can be very, very successful. Oops. All right. It's a good time to pause. There's not an unmute all button, but okay. But if anybody has questions, go ahead. If you want to go ahead and type them in the chat, I'll just kind of look at your smiling faces right now. Doesn't look like it. Okay, great. All right, so our second grant that we have open, again, both of these applications are due on the 2nd of August, excuse me, is after schools. And this one is a little more complicated. It's also more open. So we will consider applications for after school meals grants from either schools or nonprofits. There's a very robust and active nonprofit community around aftercare in our state, and that's great. They serve children well. We're fairly agnostic about who applies, so long as the community is being served, and it's again it's serving a high need, likely to be sustainable. Probably the heaviest lift on the part of applicants for this one is we do require that you participate in a USDA program called the Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP. This, and again, this, if you're a first-time organization doing this, the way CACFP works, it's a site and a sponsor system. It's similar to the Summer Food Service Program, if you're familiar with that. And you have to, again, as a sponsor, the sponsors are more or less responsible for working with the state, for filing monthly meal claims, for making sure all the rules are being complied with. Sites are actual sites where the food is served. Sites have to be in a place that's area eligible. But the sponsors are kind of like the administrators, and you can be both a site and a sponsor at the same time. A lot of places are that. Or you can be a sponsor with a site that multiple sites that you operate, And some sponsors will operate sites that are operated by other organizations, and all those things are allowable. But if you are a new site or a sponsor, and you're applying for this grant, or you're a prospective site or sponsor, and you're applying for this grant, we ask that you apply to the state. There's a state application process to do in order to be enrolled in CACFP. CACFP in the state of Missouri is operated by the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. It's not operated by No Kid Hungry. Again, we're a grant making organization project, and we're a project that is that offers technical assistance and support for organizations that are doing this. But ultimately, in order to do this and to participate and receive USDA reimbursements for your meals, you have to participate in CACFP. And that process can take anywhere from a month to 3 months, depending upon how quickly you get the application in, how completely the questions are answered. And we just ask that you get your paperwork in as soon as possible, and that you make every effort to be up and running by November 1st. There's an asterisk on that slide because we want to be, as flexible as possible. This is not necessarily easy work, and we want folks to benefit from this. So if you just communicate with us during the application process, we will negotiate if it gets to be, into November. But honestly, again, we want to have folks up and running with the state as CACFP sponsors or sites by November 1st if you're applying for this grant. Okay. Yes. Okay. All right, and again, the priorities for this grant are very similar to the priorities for the school breakfast grant. We're looking for efforts that are likely to be sustainable. We kind of look at how what your proposed purchases are. Are there a lot of after school food programs in the community? Almost always there's not. After school participation in Missouri in terms of the food program is fairly low. When we first started this project, it was 8% of basically the equivalent of 8% of the student population enrolled in free or reduced school meals was participating in after school meals. And the goal, the standard kind of nationally for it is about 20%. Since this project began, we're now up to a little higher than 15, but it just kind of shows you how underutilized it is in Missouri. This is really a big frontier, I think, for child nutrition, is adoption of after school meals. So we look for that. We look for, whether this is something that's serving the community, maybe that wasn't there before. And we look at, cooperation with other entities when relevant. Just a couple notes about after school meals in Missouri. We are one of the few states where after school meals participation increased during the pandemic. It actually did. That was not the case around the country. And again, I think part of that was because of just, this awareness spreading about this program, and particularly how it can benefit rural schools and school district. Well, I shouldn't say rural schools, rural communities, excuse me, and communities where there's just not a lot of access to food. There have been some places that, and I'll go over one in a second, where it really was a game changer. It really did kind of change their school community in a good way. This is one model of after school meals. A lot of entities that are kind of looking at this, they have to look at the economics necessarily, right? So this is one model for kind of a sustainable service. This school, they called it a super snack, and it is a refrigerated stable meal that is portable and in this case, the unit cost for each one of these meals, this is just, again, just one model. The unit cost for these meals is less than the USDA reimbursement for after school meals. So they were able to, if you serve enough of these, because that reimbursement is fairly consistent, and again, we're talking about after school meals here. The reimbursement is fairly consistent. If you serve enough of them, in some cases, we've seen an actual, what we call some lowercase p profit to the nutrition program, which then must be invested back in the nutrition program. So I bring that up because a lot of times people talk about quality when it comes to school meals, particularly in the wake of this pandemic. We saw a lot of feedback about the quality of school meals and the quality of USDA reimbursed meals. And this is just one way that, if the program is successful enough, the economics can work in favor of quality, because if you have more money coming in through these reimbursements than what your costs are, you can put that back into staffing, and you can put that back into the food quality. And it has happened in some places in Missouri. None of it's easy, but it is possible, and it does happen. All right, so I wanted to talk about the details of funding part of your application, some of the mechanics of your application. So all of these applications are going to be done online, and you'll be asked, I think it's less than 20 questions, and we try to keep them very simple. You're asked which organization you're applying for. And by the way, it is okay. We are perfectly fine if you are filing an application on behalf of an organization. So we get this a lot. We get, a lot of nonprofits and schools, they have a third-party vendor that does their school nutrition program. They fill out the application. The No Kid Hungry Missouri grant application is filled out by an employee of that vendor. That's absolutely fine. The only thing is, for the organization name blank on your application, we need you to put either the school or the aftercare organization that you're applying for. Don't put the vendor name, because then we have to call you and ask who you're really applying for. And again, that's at the beginning of the application, and at the end of the application form, one of the last questions you're asked is, what are you proposing to purchase? And we bring this up because we want to evaluate this as, just what it tells us what your plan is. And we do look at for things to have a sustainable effect. It's not always possible, but excuse me. It's not always, possible to have just a plain equipment purchase, by the way. Particularly lately, particularly in the post-COVID environment, we have had requests for things like staffing and transportation, and we will evaluate those. Every single proposal we will evaluate. This is just kind of a metric here, right? If it's more likely to be sustainable, it gets a few more points than if it's less likely to be sustainable. And then again, our only hard and fast rule is we can't purchase food. The online form is new. We started that during the summer cycle this past year. If you find there's limitations in the form, like maybe you have more than 7 line items, or maybe you have a line item that has more than 25 units to it, that's okay. Just contact us and we will give you a paper form to fill out. If you run into any kind of technical issues for that. The most important thing is we get an understanding of your plan, not if you put the right thing in the right box. So if there's problems, confusion, let us know. It's most important for us to know what you're purchasing. Okay, we have a question in the chat. Yes, we will absolutely consider former grantees. There is no restriction against applying for these grants if you have been awarded before. However, again, on the evaluation side, we consider all that. We want to have some geographic. We definitely want to have geographic diversity in our state, because there's so many places where no one's serving non-traditional breakfast and no one's serving after school meals. And we want to be as fair as possible. But yes, please apply. If you've applied before and you have an idea for how you can use some money for things like equipment training or other sustainable efforts for school year 21-22, please do apply. We would love to hear from you. And I'll go ahead and be candid and say that we have not gotten a lot of after-school applications so far this year. So right now, it's looking pretty good if you're applying for after school. Knock on wood. Yes, we are recording the Zoom meeting. I will distribute slides after this meeting, as well as the live. There's going to be two things that I call attention to at the end of the presentation. One is going to be the grant application deadlines, and the other is going to be another webinar that we're doing later this month. I will send out an email with the slides attached from this presentation and the links to those events. When the recording comes available, it usually takes a day or two, Deborah, for the recording to become available, but I'll send that out too as well as when that's available. This is an example, details of funding, obviously, that you're seeing on your screen for you. So just a couple simple things. We want a somewhat detailed description of the item you're proposing to purchase. You do not have to get bids, by the way. Sorry to just to say that in that tone, but we've gotten that question a few times. This isn't like a school bidding process. We just want a general idea of what you're going to purchase. If you look something up, say on a vendor's website, and you just copy paste the first line description of the item, that'll work. Okay, unit cost is the cost per unit. So in this case, this applicant was proposing to buy 6 carts. In this first line item, 6 4-shelf angle carts for $3.75 each. You do not need to put the total for your line item if you have multiple. If there's going to be multiple units of it, we can do that math. Just put the unit cost if you don't mind, please. And again, the quantity is how many of each item. How many of each unit. We do have a technical limitation in that the drop box will only go down to 25. If you have a line item that's more than that, just let me know and we'll get it documented. Okay, so that's a sample details of funding. When you are awarded, awardees have 2 report requirements after award. First of all, if you've never worked with us before, we do, once you're awarded the grant, you get the check. You don't have to purchase your items and be reimbursed. You get the check for the amount that we approved you for, up to $5,000 for both lines, by the way. And then when you make the purchase, we ask for a receipt, and a copy of the receipt, and a report saying what exactly you purchased. Because sometimes there's a bit of, as happens, there's a bit of a difference. My item might be cheaper, or maybe you got a better deal on a slightly different item. So we call it the invoice report. We have an invoice report that you turn in that we actually describe each item and then attach receipts for the actual purchase. Again, this is down the road after you've been awarded and you've already made your purchases and you're serving the kids and you're trucking along. The second main reporting requirement is we want for every month how many meals you served. To answer Henrietta's question, the after school one, I believe daycares would daycares would be eligible for the after school one at the very least. Okay, so those are the 2 reporting requirements. And then we have 2 things coming up that I want to call attention to. One is obviously the grant deadline. That's Monday, August 2nd. We need to get all the applications in by then. We expect there to be about a week period to evaluate everybody, and then we'll notify awardees and those who were not successful within, again, about a week, maybe 2 weeks. We're operating a little late, by the way. I know that. I realize that we are a little late this year, so we're going to try and streamline that evaluation as quickly as we can. It's one of the reasons why we asked for the details of funding up front now. We didn't do that, and there's been years past we didn't do that. But so that should help speed things up and get the awardees their money as quickly as possible. And then on the 26th, so between now and the grant deadline, we are going to have another webinar specifically for schools, because there are a lot of schools that tend to be interested in after-school meals, and there tends to be a lot of questions on the front end from the schools. This is partly because the CACFP sponsor application, when it was originally kind of drafted, CACFP was mostly for daycares. It has since become heavily utilized by schools. It can be utilized by schools, but some of the questions might be a little on that application form. They have in the past confused our school awardees. And so we are going to have a presentation that goes through the main application, the 3 main forms, step by step. Tanya Harvey, who is the coordinator for the bureau that oversees the After School Meals Program, CACFP, for the state, will be there to help answer questions. But if you're a school and you're interested in after school meals and you want to know more about that process, and you're interested in our grant, highly recommend that you catch this webinar or watch the recording. It can save you a lot of time on that state application in particular. So I'll send out these links to I have everybody's email address who's attending. I'll send out links to register for the July 26th webinar, and also the links to apply for the grants. That appears to be what I have at the time. So this is our contact information. For those of you who have been with our project for a while, Laura Hambrecht, Bittersweet News, moved on to a job with federal government way back in October. And we are joined by Kimberly Springer, who is helping with the project now. We are on the internets. MOFAC.org has our main website, and NoKidHungry@MOFAC.org is our main email address. We also are on Twitter at NoKidHungryMo, and that is where you can get a lot of information about upcoming grants, upcoming webinars, conferences, ways that our project seeks to support folks who are doing the good work of feeding Missouri's children. And again, I'll send these slides out. I feel like I covered pretty much most of what I was going to cover today in terms of the grants. I highly there's probably going to be questions as you move down the line. Just go ahead and email those to us. Yeah, that's about what I have. Any other questions? All right, people, thank you very much for attending. I'll go ahead and give you looks like if there's no questions, I'll give you the gift of 17 additional minutes of your time today. And really appreciate all the great work all of you do. And again, we'll send all this stuff out. Thanks very much.